When a multi-million-dollar construction project goes off the rails, the root cause is rarely a massive engineering failure. The real damage usually starts on day one, hitting inside tiny coordination gaps. Before a single permanent brick is laid, crews have to engineer a fully functioning, heavily regulated temporary city from scratch, usually on an empty, hazardous lot. The industry term for this critical phase is site mobilization. It is governed by a strict set of rules known as Division 01 General Requirements. Division 01 is the section of a construction contract that dictates the temporary facilities, safety protocols, and administrative rules needed to run a job site. As this isometric diagram shows, a raw dirt lot is inherently dangerous, heavily scrutinized by agencies like OSHA, the EPA, and the DOT, enforcing safety, environmental, and transit rules. To understand how it functions, we deconstruct its anatomy into three critical infrastructure layers. Mastering the exact order and placement of this invisible infrastructure is the ultimate predictor of whether a project will finish on time and under budget. Layer 1 is defining the site borders. Total site control is the absolute first step for any build because you cannot safely deliver valuable materials to a space you don't control. Here we see the baseline requirement for physical access control. Commercial-grade temporary fencing and thick, lockable access points are mandatory to keep the site isolated. Looking at the exterior, we see another strict requirement: clear, public-facing warnings. Mandatory no trespassing signage mounted directly to the wire fencing, along with visibility barriers, establish the legal boundaries of the work zone. Beyond the fence, external traffic control components like heavy concrete jersey barriers, covered pedestrian walkways, and DOT-compliant signage are deployed to safely divert the public away from heavy equipment access points. Without a locked perimeter, the risks cascade immediately: unauthorized civilian entry, catastrophic material theft, and massive legal liability. A secure perimeter creates the necessary physical and legal boundary, transforming a public liability into a controlled staging ground that is finally ready for human workers. Layer 2 is the site command center. Once the perimeter is secure, the site needs a brain and a set of life support systems for the incoming workforce. This animated blueprint shows the deployment of mobile office trailers, which serve as the operational hub. Notice the glowing lines routing through the site. These represent temporary utility connections, like electricity, internet, and heating, required to make trailers functional. OSHA regulations strictly govern worker sanitation. Portable toilets and hand wash stations automatically scale to match the crew's exact density. The logistics of the physical space itself require exact sequencing. Material staging areas and equipment parking must be arranged so that delivery trucks can enter, unload, and exit without causing costly bottlenecks. Failing to properly size and coordinate this human infrastructure directly degrades worker productivity, morale, and safety. A poorly planned setup turns a high-performance construction team into a chaotic, stalled crowd. Layer 3 acts as the metabolism and nervous system of the site. An active build generates massive amounts of waste and faces round-the-clock environmental risks. Contractors have to manage a waste diversion rate. This is a metric tracking the percentage of construction waste that is recycled or reused rather than sent to a landfill. To hit mandatory targets, often 65% or higher, dumpsters must be precisely categorized to separate different debris types. This document outlines EPA regulations for handling hazardous materials, like spent solvents or contaminated soil. The text details strict rules for preliminary notification and specialized containment to track the generation of hazardous waste. We also have to establish the site's nervous system, lighting, and surveillance. Diesel or solar light towers are required to provide specific minimum foot candles of illumination, a unit measuring the amount of light reaching a surface, to guarantee safe night operations. Under those lights, mobile surveillance cameras and motion sensors are deployed to monitor the site 24/7, protecting the expensive assets staged inside the perimeter. This final layer operates as the site's immune system. It prevents internal toxic hazards from leaking out into the environment, while simultaneously preventing external threats from penetrating the site. Looking at this animated diagram of a fully mobilized site, we see a perfectly synchronized machine. Materials flow in, waste flows out, and workers operate safely within the illuminated boundaries. Building this temporary city traditionally requires managing a fragmented web of independent vendors, each operating on their own schedule. As this graphic of overlapping contracts shows, you might have one vendor for fencing, a different one for dumpsters, a third for toilets, another for lighting, and yet another for trailers. This logo represents a modern alternative to that chaos. The one-call total setup model consolidates site mobilization under a single provider to entirely eliminate those coordination gaps. The invisible, temporary city is the foundational engine of every project, the structure that makes the permanent building possible in the first place. Looking at this animated diagram of a fully mobilized site, we see a perfectly synchronized machine. Materials flow in, waste flows out, and workers operate safely within the illuminated boundaries. Building this temporary city traditionally requires managing a fragmented web of independent vendors, each operating on their own schedule. As this graphic of overlapping contracts shows, you might have one vendor for fencing, a different one for dumpsters, a third for toilets, another for lighting, and yet another for trailers. This logo represents a modern alternative to that chaos. The one-call total setup model consolidates site mobilization under a single provider to entirely eliminate those coordination gaps. The invisible, temporary city is the foundational engine of every project, the structure that makes the permanent building possible.